Hey YouTube, it's Greg. So, I'm coming to you today with a very interesting story. So, for those of you who don't know, there's recently been a picture going around the internet of a dress, and this picture is blowing up the internet. And of course, as a guy, normally I would not care about a picture of a dress. If there's a picture of a pretty lady in a dress that's conservatively dress, then I might be interested. I might say, okay, yeah, she looks nice in that dress. But just a dress, who cares? So anyway, what is so interesting about a stupid dress? Well, I'm glad you asked. So, this one woman who owns this dress took a picture of it. She said that, hey, from what I gathered from reading articles on the internet, she had taken this dress to different parties before, and different times the dress had been seen as blue and black. But then other times she took it to the party and she's like, wait a minute, this dress is white and gold. I thought it was blue and black. And so she took a picture of this dress and put it on the internet. And some people, when they look at this dress, they are seeing blue and black. Other people are seeing white and gold. And it's not just a tiny difference. It's not blue-ish and white and gold-ish. It is blue and black or white and gold. When I first saw this, I saw white. It was an ugly white, but it was white. And gold, a very light gold. And those were terribly ugly colors. And then it turned like violet and gold, and at one point it was blue and green for me. But for the most part, now what I'm seeing is blue and black. At one point it turned to blue and black, and then it was blue and green, but now it's pretty much staying blue and black when I see it. So, whatever, this is quite bizarre. So different psychologists have weighed in on it. Different people are, experts are giving their opinions about what the color perception is going on here. And it's definitely turning out to be an interesting story. I'll let you guys read more about that. But what I thought was interesting about this dress, and the reason I decided to make this video now, is that to me it really shows how different people can see the same thing and have completely different perceptions. It kind of becomes an analogy for worldviews. So for those of you who don't know, your worldview is basically your filter with how you perceive the world. It's the glasses that you look at the world through. And every time I've filmed this, I've done a couple takes on this video so far, every time I'm playing with my glasses, because I just keep thinking about it, that worldview is like the glasses through which you see the world, through which you perceive the world. So somebody who grows up in Mumbai, India, and is raised in a Brahmin caste family, they may see the world very different from somebody who grows up as an atheist in London. And they're going to see the world very differently from somebody who grows up in, say, the swamps of New Orleans. They're going to have a very different worldview. Whereas the atheist might have a very materialistic worldview, the person in India is going to generally have a very spiritual, might very well, different strokes for different folks. They might have a very spiritual worldview, or they may, have a very spiritual worldview when they go to temple and all that, but the rest of the time they may have a very secular worldview. So you can have more than one depending on the circumstances. In my experience, it seems that people tend to have one that's more dominant, though. And then you go to New Orleans, like I said, you're going to have some interesting worldview there. So people will have a mix of voodoo with Christianity, and they believe that they might believe there's vampires running around. And so, as strange as that last worldview might sound, it's just how people perceive the world. And it's interesting to me because as somebody going for a degree in the biological sciences, I've really noticed how people's philosophies about the world can really change their perception of the data. And it is kind of unfortunate because a lot of scientists don't really realize they're doing it. As one professor recently put it in his class, he said the only assumption that is really truly bad is the assumption that you don't know you're making. And I thought that was very, very profound and very interesting. And so anyway, when I go into the laboratory, if I'm analyzing data, I may look at the same organisms as one of my professors. So you have scientists out there who are creationists, including scientists who believe in a young Earth, who are just as well qualified as anybody else. You got scientists, coming from places like Harvard and Cornell and Ivy League schools like that, who are young Earth creationists. But most scientists right now, because I'd say it's the dominant view a lot of times because it's the dominant view, most scientists are more Darwinian in their worldview. So you might have two scientists both looking at the same data. Say, well, these three organisms, they might say, all have very, very similar genes. And the scientist who's more of a Darwinist will say, well, this proves that they have a common ancestor. Whereas somebody who's like me, or like some of the famous creation scientists out there, which I'm still a student, so I'm maybe not quite a scientist yet, I'm still more of a scientist in training, but a creationist who's a scientist might look at this and say, you know what, I think organisms B and C share a common ancestor, but I think that common ancestor only has a common designer with organism A. I think that organism A and B are not related physically, but they do have a common engineer that made both of them. And being somebody who hangs out with a lot of engineers, it's really interesting because if they're asked to design two different things, especially two different things that do a similar job, they tend to have a similar approach to how they do that. They tend to have certain ideas or certain personality traits with how they do things that they might tend to favor, if all of that was said with proper grammar. So, anyway, it's also interesting for another reason, because while origin science, so when we're talking about where we come from, origin science, or if you want to call it historical science, you might have two different geologists looking at a volcano. They'll both agree on how that volcano works. They'll both agree of how that volcano works in the present, generally speaking. As a biologist, will agree with how cells work, will agree with how the human body works. But people disagree on how it got there. And so what you believe about the world, your worldview, will very much color your perception of origin science. But when it comes to operation science, it's very interesting because that person from India and that atheist and that person who was raised maybe a Southern Baptist or the person who was raised in New Orleans, they'll all go into the same laboratory if they decide to go for science, and they expect the universe to be logical, rational, and consistent. They say, hey, you know what? If I do this exact same experiment under the exact same conditions, I should pretty much get the same result every time. A little bit of variability depending on maybe I accidentally dropped something or whatever, or I shook this piece of DNA a little too long, or maybe there was a slight mutation in one of my bacteria. But pound for pound, they expect to pretty much, you go into the laboratory, do the same thing under the same conditions, you should get the same results, whether it's today or tomorrow or 100 years from now. So people expect the universe to be rational, logical, and consistent. To repeat those three words again. And why is this interesting? Well, historically speaking, this idea of expecting the universe to be logical, rational, and consistent came from a biblical Christian creationist worldview. So people like Isaac Newton, people like Kepler, they looked at the world and they said, well, because the world was created by a logical, rational, consistent God who is unchanging and who upholds the universe, we think that the universe is going to obey laws that are consistent. They're the same yesterday, they're the same today, and they're the same tomorrow. So we're going to try to find these laws and try to deduce these laws and see if we can explain the universe through understandable, rational, consistent, and logical natural laws. And that is how modern science was born. Those early modern scientists expected that. Whereas the pagans in Europe, people like the Greeks, they looked at things like fossils, and you really couldn't do paleontology because all of those fossils could be something that a trickster god put there. There's no reason that you would necessarily expect the laws of physics to be the same today and tomorrow. And somebody who's a Hindu, they think the universe is an illusion anyway. Essentially, the universe is a dream. It's kind of like the Matrix. And not to go down too far of a bunny trail, we'll roll our eyes at that one. But I'm told that the movie The Matrix was based partially on Hinduism and partially on the allegory of the cave. And I'm told there's, some Christian ideas thrown in there too. That was definitely a philosophical trip. Great movie. And so it's interesting that no matter what your worldview is, no matter what your religion, when you're going into the laboratory, people often don't realize, in part at least, they're putting on the glasses of a Christian who is a biblical creationist. They're putting on the glasses of a biblical creationist. They're expecting the universe to be logical, rational, and consistent. And for the atheist, the fact that this was the case, it didn't come out of atheism. The universe could be completely chaotic with laws that constantly shift back and forth. The fact that they were consistent came out of Christianity. The fact that the universe is consistent is definitely not expected from a Hindu worldview. From a Muslim worldview, it's also not consistent. And that's part of the reason why Islam started to, and maybe I'll go in more detail with this later, science, a lot of science started to be developed in the Middle East, started to be developed in the Arab world, though the Muslim contribution is very, very much exaggerated these days, if you go to a secular or Muslim source. Although it's very much exaggerated, the reason that modern science was not really borne out in the Muslim world is because Muslims do not look at Allah as being consistent. So Allah might have it where the boiling point of water at sea level is 100 degrees Celsius today, under, standard conditions, but tomorrow it might be 1,000 degrees Celsius. So Allah, very much in the Muslim worldview, operates on a whim. It's very much like and I don't mean to be insulting the Muslims by saying this, but it's very much like the god of pagan mythology, Zeus, who also operated on a whim. And again, I'm not trying to be insulting, I'm just explaining it. And so, I guess, wrapping all that up, different people have different worldviews, and that colors their perception. And a lot of times I think that especially evolutionists don't really understand this, or they don't want to acknowledge this, even though it's very, very clear from philosophy that this is the case. And also, I think it's interesting that even the die-hard atheist, when they're walking into a laboratory, they're very, very much borrowing from the Christian worldview. So, anyway, that was a lot. That was a mouthful. I went a little over the time I meant to, but I think it was worth it. So, thank you for watching my video. Check out my websites. They'll be coming up here in just a second. Check out my other videos. Subscribe, comment, rate, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. And really question what you've been taught, question what you believe. And for those of you who are especially skeptics of Christianity, I really want to encourage you, take those questions you have and really seek them out, because despite maybe growing up in a church that was unintellectual, or growing up around Christians who just said, well, I believe everything by blind faith, there are those of us who do really seek to give rational, logical answers for the questions that people have. And I hope that you can take the time to take a look at those. Post in the comments, see what kind of answers people have given. This is Greg, out.